Hebrews chapter 12, starting in verse 5, says this, "And have you forgotten the exhortation that addresses you as sons? My son, do not regard lightly the discipline of the Lord, nor be weary when reproved by him. For the Lord disciplines the one he loves and chastises every son whom he receives." So there's something that they need to remember. And they've forgotten something. And certainly, he's saying that they've forgotten the fact that God disciplines those whom he loves. He says, you need to know this. You need to remember this. I'm not teaching you some new secret doctrine. I'm reminding you of something that you already knew. Remember this. And so even before we want to talk about remembering that God disciplines those he loves, like let's just remember this too. God loves his children. That's the thing that we need to understand more than anything else. God loves his children. That's the undergirding and overarching principle as we discuss the concept of God disciplining his children, is that he disciplines those whom he loves. And if you came in and got the little bulletin or flyer, this sermon is called God's Loving Discipline. I think if we separate or isolate the idea of discipline from love, then it just looks into something ugly. But he's reminding them, first off, that God loves his children. And as a good father, as a good parent, he is involved in their lives. He is steering them away from certain damaging things and towards certain helpful things. He wants to correct them and guide them and bring them into maturity. And we'd call all of that discipline. God's work of discipline is for his children whom he loves, and it's to bring out of immaturity and sin and into maturity. God loves his children. You are being addressed as sons. He's not saying because your life has gotten difficult, that means that God has neglected or forgotten you. But sometimes it's the case, and I'm sorry to say this, but sometimes it's an evidence of God's love and care when our life gets more difficult. Now again, this is like Owen trying to skip the scene in Lion King because it's uncomfortable. It's not popular. But I believe this is what we should hear, where the author says to his listeners, don't forget this. And I'm saying to you, don't forget this. Remember this. Don't regard lightly the discipline of the Lord, nor be weary when reproved by him. The Lord disciplines the one he loves and chastises every son whom he receives. We're receiving his discipline. You, Christian believer, you're receiving God's discipline perhaps. And it's not because you're not part of God's family, but because you are. I want to define discipline, and then we'll continue on. I understand discipline, or particularly parental discipline, as the shaping of circumstances around a child that teach and train them to be obedient. Say it again. It's the shaping of circumstances around a child that teach and train them to be obedient.